Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel is a primatologist. She's studied the human-primate interface for 35 years. Her scientific career has spanned the field, the research laboratory, and the undergrad classroom. And Lisa currently serves as Senior Science Advisor on Primate Experimentation with PETA's Laboratory Investigations Department. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's wonderful to be able to connect on this level. The primates often get lost in our animal activism. It seems like we focus a lot on food animals. I'm wondering when did you become vegan? How did you find this path?
Actually, it was a quite sudden transition. So, as part of my onboarding for PETA, there's a series of information that we read and some videos and whatnot. And so one of those was called Earthlings. And you have to remember, prior to coming to PETA, I grew up in the primate biomedical community. And so the whole animal rights world was anathema to me. It really, I wasn't, it was something that we kept away from in the biomedical community for lots of reasons. But and so I had never seen anything like Earthlings. And I remember sitting there watching this, and that's it. I was done. It was really that quick. I was like, I had been vegetarian for the previous couple of years. I always would tell my husband I'm probably like a closet vegetarian because I come from a very food-centric family. We have several chefs and from a Southern background. But no, it was at that point it was never going to be an issue again. So yeah.
Yeah, it is, that movie is still, I think, I watch it every now and then just to reinforce that. I had the shift, right? It's such a
Yes.
different perspective than what we're taught as through our lives growing up, really. Yeah. And you mentioned that the biomedical community stays away from activism. I guess when you're doing that kind of research, you kind of have to shut something down. Is that what you mean?
I don't think it's not just that. That's a little too benign. I think it's we are literally taught within the biomedical community that the animal rights community is, they're a bunch of nitwits and nuts, and that their goal is to destroy us, to distort our science, to take everything that we do within the biomedical community out of context, and that actually, so when you're in like a national primate center, you are literally not allowed to look at any of the animal rights information websites on university equipment.
Wow.
So,
Wow. And what made you go to PETA for work then?
again, I spent 17 years at the University of Washington. 14 of those years was as a primate scientist within the Washington National Primate Research Center. When I took that position, fresh out of graduate school, I was a biological anthropologist. I was offered a position in a primate center. Most anthropologists, you're lucky to get a job. So I jumped to this opportunity. Previous to that, I had grown up in the primate labs around the country. But at the primate center, I really felt, because my work was focused on, I was working in Asia, and I was looking at how infectious diseases move back and forth between humans and primates. And I felt that within the primate center, I could help them better understand, better characterize the macaque as a biomedical model, given what I understood about primate behavior and about primate infectious disease and the risks and the overblown risks of disease transmission out in the wild. So I really thought that within the primate center, I could help them make a better monkey model, which in turn would lead to better science. And I could also help them improve animal welfare within the center, because I had spent so many years really understanding what makes a macaque a macaque. 14 years in the primate center, you can only hit your head against the wall so many times before even I figured I wasn't going to get anywhere. I then spent 2 years on the University of Washington's Animal Oversight Committee. Everyone who uses animals in biomedical research in this country, in the US, who receives federal funding, must have their protocols approved by the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. when I would write up my papers for publication, and there's always a line in there where you say, yes, my research has been reviewed and approved by my institutional animal care and use committee. So for me and for other scientists, this was an ethical and a scientific hurdle in which, when you clear that, that should establish to your peers that this research is scientifically sound and ethically sound. And I learned, sitting on the UW's Animal Oversight Committee, that that's actually not how it works. And again, I spent 2 years on that committee, literally fighting tooth and nail for best practices to be adopted, for harm benefit analyses to be conducted, for a rigorous assessment of the scientific utility of these highly invasive procedures that were being called for, and to just advocate for even the most basic level of welfare for these. I was focusing on the monkeys because I'm a primatologist, but I certainly saw the same things with the mice and the rats and the ferrets and the dogs and the pigs. UW was failing, and it was failing miserably. And if an institution as big and as powerful and as well funded as UW was paying lip service and rubber stamping these animal protocols, I was not going to be a part of it anymore. I was not going to lend it any legitimacy. And so I resigned my position from the university as a faculty member. And I never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would find myself as an animal rights person. PETA came knocking on my door about 2 months after I left UW. And I like to say, actually, UW and UW's Animal Use Committee made me an animal rights activist. They made me who I am today.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the primates are happy about it.
I hope so, because that's my job. I owe a lot. I mean, I used in my field work, I would trap and sedate and collect biological samples from wild free-ranging macaques and from pet macaques and performing macaques. And I built my career on those animals. And for me, it was, I always woke them back up, made sure that they were fully recovered, and that they were well fed and everything was hunky-dory, and gave them antibiotics if they needed, or wormed them, or whatever needed to be done. And then I'd let them go free again. But I was using those animals, and I was causing them real distress. You capture a wild monkey, and you mentally, you psychologically, and sometimes even you physically, you cause them pain. So I owe these animals a debt, both of the wild monkeys that I was dealing with, and certainly all these laboratory macaques that I knew what was going on behind those doors. And I tried to fix it. I couldn't from within. Now, with PETA at my side, at my back, I think we stand a very good chance of truly just exposing these facilities for what they are. Mm-hmm. They're not ethical. The science that's being done is poor because of all these confounders as far as the way we house the animals, the unintended infections they have, the fact that monkeys are not furry little humans with tails. It's, there are 24 million years of evolutionary distance between us and these macaques. And during that time, our physiology, our biology, our immunology has diverged so completely that though they may be our closest cousins, they are not adequate and appropriate models for human disease.
I have so many questions.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I'm so happy to have you here and speaking so honestly about what's going on and in what has happened in your life. And, we've all been brought up with this idea that animals are something we can use in various different forms, and we've sort of grown to accept that. And thankfully, some of us become those nitwit vegan activists who aren't afraid to say, hang on a minute, there's something fundamentally not right about this. And so the U of W then is just one facility. These facilities exist all around the world, I guess, at universities mostly.
Precisely. So within the US, there's a chain of national primate research centers that were established back in the 1960s. Canada has its fair of, they don't have national primate research centers, but they have primate laboratories and universities that are using non-human primates. Central America, South America, Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, basically on every continent. There are institutions, often laboratories, sometimes contract research labs, sometimes academic facilities that are using tens of thousands of monkeys every year.
And then just throw them away at the end, I guess.
Oh yeah, no, there's no happy ending. There's, for 99.99999% of monkeys that are in the laboratories, they end up dead.
Are they purpose bred for this?
Oh, now you're getting into some of the really interesting stuff in this.
Okay.
So there are a couple of different pipelines. So there are the macaques that are being caught in Asia, China, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Philippines. These are typically wild, free-ranging macaques that are caught in tremendously brutal manners. They're then brought into facilities within these countries. They're quote unquote conditioned for a couple of weeks or a few months. Technically, according to CITES, wow, am I blanking on the Conservation of International Trade and Export of Species, the Convention on the International Trade and Export of Species, CITES. Technically, the only primates that are allowed to be exported out of these habitat countries are F1, so that's the next generation of a captive. So if mom and dad were wild caught, their infant can be exported. Technically, the wild caught parents cannot be. That is, unfortunately, that is very easily subverted through this complex mechanism of moving monkeys around. So anyway, annually from Asia, 35, 40, 50,000 macaques over the last decades have been coming in each decade. Things have changed a little bit with COVID. There has been some slowdown, but now that's picking back up. So you have the international importation into North America. And then within North America, you have like these national primate research centers, which have breeding colonies. And then those animals that are bred here are then moved throughout, used within these centers or shipped to other facilities around the country.
And is this mostly for medical research then?
The two pipelines serve two different research. I mean, it's all for biomedical research. Typically, the monkeys that are imported internationally go into big pharma. And so these are often what's called long-tailed macaques. They're brought in. They typically they enter into the States in Houston or up in Chicago. They undergo quarantine, and then they're sent out fairly rapidly to the big pharma who are doing drug testing and contract research. Those monkeys, if they're alive after 6 months, that's unusual. Typically, they're ground up so quickly in this research. They go on their study. They are, whether it's a vaccine efficacy study or a new drug treatment study, the animal's there, the data are gathered, the animal is killed. And so it is, the number of monkeys that have been imported into North America in since 2000, that number, 500,000 monkeys at least, maybe more. I should have checked that number up before. Okay. It's an astonishingly large number of monkeys.
Yeah.
The ones that are bred here in country tend to be more of the rhesus macaque, And there's a historical reason why that is the case, which you may not want to necessarily get into, but so those rhesus macaques, those are the ones that are used more in kind of basic research. They're used in neuro studies. They're used in some infectious disease studies. So the vaccine development, vaccine failure studies, like the HIV vaccine failure studies, almost always use the rhesus macaque for that. And then there's one other species of macaque, and that's called the pigtailed macaque. And the University of Washington specialized in pigtail macaques. These are some of the most beautiful monkeys. I love all macaques, but the pigtail macaques are astonishingly beautiful monkey. The females and the males, they have these beautiful reddish golden brown coats. They have a lot of eye makeup, it seems like, with the red and the blue and the white. It's just part of the way that they, a really healthy animal has just this beautiful coloring. Anyway, the UW breeds these at a facility down in Mesa, Arizona. This is a facility that we recently, working with a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist at the Arizona Republic, uncovered that the animals there are infected with valley fever. They are housed less than 500 meters from a toxic waste site. And so the groundwater and the surface water are contaminated with lead and perchlorate. The valley fever infection basically renders these animals completely unusable and unsuitable for HIV infectious disease research. So here you have, within this country, hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent on using these pigtail macaques for research. And the suffering is priceless. The taxpayer dollars that have been wasted on bad science, that is calculable. And that is an extraordinary amount of money.
So let's go back to the wild. I'm just trying to imagine what it'd be like to be a little baby monkey that's taken from a wild. There, I guess, still are wild habitats, natural habitats that are lush and green and plentiful and beautiful. And we know primates and all animals have familial relations. And so this animal is scooped up and transported and then ends up. Can you describe that process and that environment they end up in?
Sure. One of the extraordinary things about macaques, and there are many extraordinary things about these monkeys, is that they are synanthropic. And that means syn, together, anthrop, with man. So unlike most of the other non-human primates, macaques are really good at thriving in the niches that humans make when they alter the environment. So in fact, macaques are the most widely distributed non-human primate on the planet. So other than humans, the macaques are the next ones, and we find them in throughout all of Asia. They have been distributed across the centuries to islands throughout the country. Actually, in Florida, in the US, there are thriving populations of rhesus macaques that escaped back in the 1940s. They can be in the mountains of Japan. They can be up in Tibet. They can be in the desert areas of Northern Africa. They are incredibly efficient at being ecological and behavioral and dietary generalists. That's not the case with most other non-human primates. So part of one of the fact that they're so good at what they do, these macaques, has been in some way their downfall. Because if you go to the cities and the temples of Asia, you see macaques everywhere. I mean, they're so good at reading humans. They can be so naughty. They can just be, they know the minute that you turn your back and you've got your ice cream cone out there and boom, it's gone. Or if you leave your window open on your balcony just a crack, or if you've left something on the back of your motor scooter, they'll even work together to distract shopkeepers and basically send in a little crack team to snag the goodies and take them back. At the end of the day, these troops will all meet up in their sleeping trees. They have fairly large home ranges and day ranges, but in the end of the day, these troops, which are about anywhere from 50 to 60 to sometimes 100 members, meet back up in their sleeping tree. They all huddle together. And that's for warmth, it's for protection, it's for just, if you're a macaque, one of the most important things that you can do is to have a relationship with other macaques. And those relationships are both genetic. All the females in a troop of macaque are related. Those relations and those relationships are further solidified through grooming. Macaques spend so much time grooming, and they're not picking out bugs or cooties or whatnot. Actually, we did a study. There are very few lice we could find on these monkeys. But it is that act, and if you've ever seen it, you can feel it. Another monkey spending every ounce of attention they have on you, going through, looking for just a little flake of skin. It's not what they get out. It's what they're doing. It's the intention. It's the focus. It is just, if you haven't been groomed by a macaque, you've lost out, frankly, so that goes to say that everything is about relationships in a macaque society. What happens in the wild is that actually what the trappers will do, they will isolate these sleeping trees, or they'll isolate the macaques in a tree. They'll cut down all the rest. They'll put the nets down. They'll bring down this tree. They'll scoop up all the monkeys. Some monkeys get away, others don't. Infants and juveniles get separated from moms. It's just an absolute god-awful mess. The animals then, again, they go into kind of the conditioning facilities, these massive 10, 15, 20,000 farms of monkeys in Asia. They're screened for some infectious diseases. The assays that they use for screening are lousy. That's a whole nother discussion. They're then packed up. They're put into crates. All social relationships are completely, these monkeys are they're thrown into big cages. Different animals are grabbed basically really on age. It has nothing to do with who they're related to. They're popped in these small transport crates. They're loaded into trucks. Sometimes they're trucked across country lines in order to facilitate or to manipulate transport or international trade agreements. They're loaded on the back of planes. They spend 24, 30, 36 hours up in the air. A recent shipment just came into the US, 720 monkeys. We don't know how many, but lots of those monkeys died in transit, which is absolutely common. The animals then go under quarantine. So they're in individual cages, they're inside. More animals die during quarantine from stress, from disease, from infections that they had, which they were able to control when they're out there being normal monkeys. But the act of confinement and transport has just destroyed their immune system. It's destroyed the most important organ in their body, which is their brain. These animals are beside themselves. Again, you've taken away the thing that makes them who they are, their ability to have a connection and a relationship with a familial, a friend. That doesn't exist. And these are animals anywhere from 18 months to 4, 5, 6 years of age. It's devastating. After quarantine, they may then be, they're sold to labs, to other facilities. They get trucked back on put another box, separated from whoever they might have even been into the next cage, sent someplace else in the country. They go into another cage. These cages are the size of your kitchen cabinet, basically, all metal sides, metal floors, a metal perch made out of 2 little metal bars. You get a handful of monkey biscuits. The regulations, which the labs and the NPRCs like to tout all the time, says, we provide environmental enrichment. That environmental enrichment might be a chewed up Kong ball that stays in that cage for 2 weeks until the cage is washed. It might be a piece of lettuce. That counts as enrichment. It might be a dented piece of metal, reflective metal that hangs next to the cage. That's enrichment. That box is checked. And then you go on study. And, it's depending on the type of study you are, you move to another room. You may be sedated twice a week. And before you're sedated, you're fasted for 12 hours. So, and then you're injected with ketamine. Once you're under sedation, you may be, ketamine is a drug that we use to sedate the animals, to make them unconscious.
Calm them down.
Well, not even calm them down. Actually, ketamine it's called a dissociative. So technically, the monkey knows what's going on, but there's nothing they can do about it.
Wow, yeah.
And then the procedure happens. So whether it was doing rectal biopsies, or they're putting it in, a gastric tube down their stomach, or they're injecting them with an experimental drug, or whatever the case may be. Then they go back in their cage. They wake up. They feel like dirt coming up out of the ketamine. They don't want to eat. They're stressed. They're sore. They're loopy from the drugs. A couple of days goes by, and then it all happens again. And in the end, at the end of the experiment, they're killed. The necropsies are performed. The data are collected. The principal investigator writes the paper. More funding is generated. And the promise of the HIV vaccines, the malaria vaccines, the TB vaccines, the Zika vaccines, they have not materialized. And that is because, again, no one who is thinking clearly about science could expect the conditions in which we maintain these animals, and the fact that we don't know the unintended infections that they have, that these conditions are going to lead to outcomes that are translatable to humans. It's just ridiculous. It's stupid. And yet it continues.
Right. Yeah. So, I guess the main argument I hear from people is that, well, it's for the greater good, right? That it's we have to sacrifice some animals so that we humans can live healthier lives. I mean, from what you're saying, it's not even doing that. And also, there are alternatives now, right? Like, there are some pretty viable alternatives for medical testing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're right. That's the refrain. You know what? Wouldn't you rather have this vaccine go into some monkey or some dog or some mouse before it goes into you? And again, let's go back to the HIV vaccines. So there have been 5 clinical trials of HIV vaccines. And in the preclinical is another word for animal studies, basically. And in the preclinical trial for all of these 5 human HIV vaccines, it worked in the monkeys and in the animals. They were able to protect these animals from infection with the vaccines that they developed. And in all 5 of those trials, once that vaccine went into humans, it failed every single time. And in fact, in 2 of those vaccines, it actually increased the likelihood that humans would become infected with HIV. And that's for HIV. We could say the same things have happened with Parkinson's. We've had Alzheimer's stuff. It's what works in monkeys does not work in humans. And yet the question, the default has still been, well, this is the best we've got. We got to keep working it out in animals. And no, actually we don't. We have these alternatives, and it is simply a matter of money and will at this stage. The willingness to set aside these 20th century science, this use of animals, and to focus on these 21st century ways of doing good science. So these organs on a chips, these biochips, that's where it's all going to happen. I really think that's going to be a huge part of it. The stem cell work, the ability to use 3D printed human tissues. The epidemiological studies, COVID has shown us the power of epidemiology, of focusing on natural infections in humans and vaccinations in humans, and how that actually does lead to reduction in transmission. Artificial intelligence, the computer modeling. People say, oh, you know what? The human biology is so complex, the computer is never going to be able to replicate that. We need to put it in these living animals. So here's the thing about models. Models are only as good as you know what's in them. Because if you don't know what's in your model, then you cannot adequately and appropriately interpret what comes out of it. And so with the computing power that we have today, all of these variables that exist can actually be part of the programming that goes into that. And we would have a much, much, much better chance of developing successful treatments and vaccines than we have with these animal models. We have 100% failure in the HIV vaccine, 100% failure in the TB vaccines that we've developed, and in the malaria vaccines that have all been developed with these animal models.
Were there pre-trials for the COVID vaccines with monkeys?
So this has been as horrible as COVID has been for the globe, and there's this tiny little silver lining, which as it has shown us how irrelevant and misleading the use of monkeys, and actually all animal models, have been. Very early on, Pfizer and Moderna, they realized that monkeys were not getting infected in the same way. And once they finally got them infected, they weren't responding to the infection in any way similar to how humans were responding to infections with the SARS-CoV-2. And on top of that, a study came out of the UK, out of this laboratory, that found that actually when they took the SARS-CoV-2 virus that had been infecting humans, and they put it into a tissue culture. And they did this because you put viruses into tissue culture because you want to make more copies of it, because then you have more of the virus to work to do your experiments with. So this is standard practice. It's been done, for decades. We've used these things called these Vero cells for this. Anyway, this laboratory, they did that. They took the human SARS-CoV-2, they put it into this tissue culture, which is made up of monkey cells. And then they did something which people hadn't really done before, is they sequenced what came out of this tissue culture. And what they found was one human virus in, two viruses came out. One was the human virus that went in, and the second one was this monkey-adapted virus. So basically, the SARS-CoV-2 virus adapted to these monkey cells, and it mutated. And so, and this is basic science. This is how viruses work. They change, they adapt to their host. This is why we're seeing all of these different variants show up. But what this laboratory showed was that if you didn't know you were making these tissue cultures, and you didn't know that actually you're getting this cocktail out, or the viruses you got out are a human virus and a monkey adapted virus, and then you wouldn't actually know if your vaccine or your treatments were actually working on the monkey adapted virus or the original human virus. This was huge. Let me pause for a moment and let monkey out. I'm sorry.
Attention. No problem. All animals are welcome here at Plant Powered Radio. I was listening to a doctor speaking on his YouTube, Dr. Bean, and a cat wandered in and was making all kinds of sounds. And his comment was that I think he's Indian, in his lovely lilting accent. He said, "Oh, she's singing the song of her people."
Yes. Well,
oh, that's great. But she had closed the door behind her and she wanted out. So yeah, animals are so smart. I mean, they communicate with us as best they can, and if we're listening, we sometimes can hear them, right? So sorry.
No, actually, to follow up on that, I'm in the lab. The way that monkeys try to communicate with us in the laboratory, that they are so miserable and broken is they either start pulling all their hair out. They basically, they hyper groom themselves until they're hairless, or they start engaging in these stereotypies, which is these repetitive movements, whether it's circling in a cage or always lifting a hand or sticking their fingers in their eyes. And it's, yeah, how can you not see that? How can you not look at that and not know that this is an animal that is broken, that is desperately trying to tell you, the experimenter, the husbandry technician, that I'm in a really bad way here. I can't go on.
It's horrifying to consider all these animals, and this is happening every second of every day. You know, I mean, again, there's all the farm animals we've just had hundreds of thousands of them, or at least 100,000 drown in British Columbia here with the flooding.
Oh, wow.
Horrifying experience that must be for them, trapped in their cages, you know. Sometimes humans, it's really frustrating, isn't it? So, you know, what's driving this? We have alternatives. There's all kinds of people employed. I'm thinking, you know, the people employed to capture them, and the people employed to transport them, and the people employed to document their whereabouts, and you know, how is this industry working? Like, how much of it is funded by governments around the world? And then what's the role of like big pharma and other industries that want to use the results of these experiments, I guess?
You're exactly, it's all about money. This is a billion-dollar industry, probably multi-billion-dollar industry. Within the US, for the National Primate Research Centers, the vast majority of their funding comes from the National Institutes of Health. And so each year across the 7 National Primate Research Centers, easily 150 million. And that's just to keep the doors open, the lights on, the monkey biscuits flowing, the veterinarian salaries paid. Those aren't the research dollars. That's just the infrastructure of it. Why does it continue to go on? It's the old guard. I think there's an old guard thinking about this. I go back to when I first went to the Washington National Primate Center. One of the first I was getting ready to go out in the field, and I wanted to practice placing the tuberculin skin test. So we always test the monkeys for TB. And the way you do it in monkeys is you place a little bit of old mammalian TB in their eyelid, and it makes a little blurb, and then you read that at 24, 48, and 72 hours. And I needed to practice up on my skills again. So I went downstairs into our colony, and I will never forget this. There was a pigtail macaque, a female. She was out on the table. She was very, very deeply sedated. And she was getting ready to be, she had finished whatever study she was going to be on. And so she was being sent to tissue distribution protocol, TDP, which means that bits and pieces of her went out to experimenters, whoever, there's a listserv for monkey bits and bobs within the NPRCs. Anyway, so she was there, and I'm standing at the end of the table, and I'm touching her foot, and I'm just thinking, I'm feeling bad that I'm going to practice on her. And I'm just thinking, I wonder what your life was like. And at that moment, another person came in. He walked up to the front of the table because they had actually asked me to wait for a few minutes. And he enucleated her. He popped out one of her eyes.
Oh.
And then this all happened within like 45 seconds or so. I mean, this was so quick. And then he had it, and then he left. And at no point.
Why did he do that?
There was investigators who were looking at, they were studying the eyes. And so they wanted the eye of this monkey.
Wow.
For me, at that point, what I got stuck on was he did not stop. There was no recognition of the animal as a being there. There was, there was no gesture, not no acknowledgement of, hey, you thanks for the eye, or something as simple as even a touch on this animal.
It sounds like he didn't acknowledge you either to say, hey, I'm going to do this thing.
No, of course not. I mean, there were a bunch of people in the room, and this person just came in, popped an eye, headed back out. And I remember thinking at that time, I don't know whether that was a postdoc or I really can't even see the person anymore in my mind's eye, or whether it was one of the principal investigators. But the thing is that most of the principal investigators, the people who are writing the grants, who are writing the papers, who are driving the research, who are going to the international conferences, who've built their careers on these animals, they have no contact. They don't go down. They're not the ones popping the monkey's eye out, or injecting them with ketamine, or getting the biopsy samples. They're so removed from the reality of the experience of that animal as to just, I guess the nice way to say is that they're clueless. Maybe it's more accurate to say that for them, the animal is a research tool. And so whether it's intentional that intellectual separation is there, that emotional separation is there, or whether it's just they can't be bothered, I can't speak for the individual investigators. But that is certainly, I think, one of the real issues that we face. And I think we also face is that there is no ethics, animal use ethics, that courses that are required for these undergraduates, these graduates, these postdocs who are coming in. The thought is that somehow it's this trickle down effect. It's bench side, you learn it, or cage side ethics. So you learn from your lab leader, your principal investigator. And if that principal investigator has never laid hands on that animal, has never considered what it means to separate these animals from their offspring, from their troop, then is it any wonder that there is this cognitive dissonance, this emotionally distant, or there is no connection there, mm-hmm. And that it all just comes about, how many papers can I get out of that eye?
Right. Yeah. Sort of become robotic in a sense.
Yeah, it's about the money. And I think that one of the things that PETA is focusing on is really trying to get a couple of things. One, to help the next generation of young scientists realize that there is no future in animal research. I do truly believe that the National Primate Research Centers will be closed down, all of them, within the next 5 years. I think that their time has come. The National Institutes stopped funding chimpanzee research a decade ago. A decade, 2011. A decade ago, because they realized that our closest living relative, another ape, was not the data that were being generated from the use of these animals, these chimps in captivity, were not translating into improved outcomes for humans. If it didn't work with chimps, the notion that somehow it's going to work with macaques or marmosets is just ridiculous. It is this legacy of animal research. And again, I think COVID has really shown the rest of the scientific community and the public that there are other ways of doing science that don't involve the use of primates. So again, Pfizer and Moderna, early on, they realized it wasn't working. Yes, they checked the regulatory box that said, I think between those two vaccines, they dropped those vaccines in 51 rhesus macaques before they started going into human arms. And that was because they knew that they were required to by law to do that.
Okay, and did they use any of these alternative approaches that you talk about?
So they focused their stuff on the mRNA vaccine. So
right.
And
Oh, so the testing though, could they use a printed cell culture of a human to
what
do?
they relied upon putting the vaccines in humans. And
Right.
so
So
early on,
it didn't work in chimps. They just went straight to humans. They didn't use any of these other cell technologies or.
I'm not familiar with that, but what I know that they realized, all right, well, this is a virus that's attacking humans. It's not behaving the same way in animals. So they asked for human volunteers. Actually, here in Seattle, the very first clinical trial was done with human volunteers on these.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the money part. So the government basically is funding these research labs and the transport and everything, and then they hand over the research to Big Pharma. Like, what's the connection there? How does that? And then Big Pharma profits off of it, and how much of that goes back into the government?
Uh, so there's it's it's complicated. It's a really tangled web on this. So the universities, the national primate centers, those folks are getting money from the National Institutes of Health. So those are taxpayer dollars that fund that research directly. The big pharma also gets some of their funding from the National Institutes of Health. They get contracts from the National Institutes of Health, but they tend to get more of their money is I guess pharma money. So it's money from private industry. It's industry money. So it's not necessarily taxpayer money, but they certainly do get their fair share of taxpayer dollars as well.
From philanthropists, I suppose.
Well, so there's something. I don't know
As
if
they're
they're
called. Yes.
exactly,
Right.
exactly, exactly.
Okay. Okay. And then, but so then I mean, they're hugely profitable. I mean, there's some reports that I think it was Merck that was near bankruptcy before COVID, and now, of course, is doing quite well because of the vaccine. And then, I mean, so then we need to look at the tax code to see how much of that ends up. Basically, humans are paying for this. Taxpayers are paying for this research.
Absolutely,
So we should have the power to
absolutely.
say whether we want it to continue or not.
Absolutely. And we are a stakeholder in this. And so often, what we hear from the biomedical community is, oh, we're so highly and well regulated, there's so many hoops that we jump through. We have to have this research done. Your granny is gonna die
Right.
unless you keep funding us to do this research.
Be
Yes,
afraid. Be very
yeah,
afraid.
be afraid, be very afraid. And yet, the public needs to hear the reality of these things. And that's what we're doing. We're reminding people again, all these promised treatments, all these promised vaccines. New? Where is it? Where are they?
Mm,
The only thing that I see is an enormous pile of dead monkeys.
mm. Where do they go? They just get thrown into a mass grave, I suppose, or
Yes, they get
incinerated?
incinerated. They get
Incinerated.
incinerated. Certainly all the ones from the NPRCs. There is a small movement. It's very small, but at least it's a start of some of the university, like the smaller primate labs that are retiring some of their monkeys to sanctuaries
Oh, nice. Yeah.
around the country. So there are a handful of these monkeys that have made it out. But I mean, this is such a fraction of a fraction of a fraction.
Right.
But it's a start,
It's something, right?
right?
And yeah, I think there's one in Texas that I know of. Okay, and so in terms of what PETA's doing then, is mostly trying to expose this, trying to raise awareness about this? Are they working, are you working with like legislators to try to change rules, that kind of thing?
All of those things. So again, it's so PETA has a campaign against the Washington National Primate Research Center. And, initially we went to the university president and the board of regents. We sent them letters. We kept it very quiet. And we said, here's the information we have through the tens of thousands of documents we received from FOIA. The primate center is hemorrhaging money. Leadership is in free fall. You're hemorrhaging staff. You've got infections that are running out of control. you can't maintain the biosecurity of your animals. The NIH took the extraordinary step and restricted your funding. You have violated state laws. You've violated federal laws. You are a complete, utter mess. Do what Harvard did when they were in the same situation about 5 years ago and shut down this primate center. So we sent several letters to the president and to the Board of Regents. No response, no response. We then began working with, we started the campaign, we started reaching out to the faculty, we started reaching out to students. We had the Rob Odell, who was a Pulitzer Prize and a Goldsmith Prize winner at the Arizona Republic, picked up the story. He spent 7 months investigating this story and did a brilliant 4-part series that exposed the valley fever infections, the toxic waste, the fact that by their own admission, UW has said that monkeys who are infected with valley fever cannot be used for HIV research. We have reached out to legislators, exactly. So I was just on the phone with several legislators week before last. We're asking for working groups. We're asking for public hearings to bring transparency to this. UW will not, actually the new director of the UW Primate Center, who has the notorious distinction of being one of the only primate scientists to have had her lab closed when she was at Wisconsin because of the number of animal deaths that she had and for failure to work appropriately with the veterinary staff and with leadership there. She then moved to UCLA, ran into the same issues at UCLA. I think it truly speaks to how much they are scraping the bottom of the barrel that she was just appointed to the UW Primate Center as the new director. She has said explicitly she refuses to speak to anyone from PETA to talk about these. So, PETA we work internationally with international, we work with the USDA, we work with international research companies, we work with toxicology groups, we work nationally with groups. The fact that WAMPRC, that's the name for the UW Primate Center, leadership refuses to talk to us speaks to how very afraid they are to having this transparent discussion. They've been giving the same tried and true, we're well regulated. Oh, they're extremist. They have a problem with me because it's a little hard to point to a Fulbright scholar who has 100 publications and just published a book on neglected monkey diseases and who spent her career in the primate biomedical community and kind of labeling us as an extremist. I think that what it is, they no longer can hide from the facts that are they're there. And the stakeholders, the public, those in leadership at the University of Washington, those within the Washington state legislature, they deserve to have these things out in the open. And that's what PETA is going to make happen.
And certainly the monkeys deserve to have their voices heard.
Exactly. Because that's, it's the other thing. UW built a primate lab a few years ago, an underground primate lab. And so, I was in it many times. The rooms are concrete. There is no sunlight. There's no natural light. There's no natural airflow. But what there is the most horrific cacophony of sound. A combination of the monkeys banging on the cage because they're so angry, of the screeching, and all of this just reverberating across these walls. And no one hears that above ground. No one is hearing their screams. I'm going to make sure that they do. Wow, this was a depressing conversation.
Aw, there's so much to be depressed about these days. It's just unbelievable. Yeah, I'm thinking of Will, Will Tuttle, he says that what we do to animals we'll eventually do to ourselves. And I mean, especially now, I just can't help but wonder what if they'll do this to these beautiful creatures, what will they do to the rest of us? And when did they lose their humanity? These people that are doing this, like, what, there's so much to unpack about all of this.
So I don't know that they've lost their, well, let me think about whether they've lost their humanity. It's that they refuse to see. They refuse to see, they refuse to hear, because again, if you take off the lens that as scientists are put over our eyes, which says that no matter what, we must succeed. And if it means I got to keep a monkey in this cage, and that I got to make this monkey so sick that he's pooping his brains out, and he's lost 20% of his body weight, and he's plucked out all of his hair, but I got to keep going forward, because I'm gonna make that next vaccine. I'm going to save Granny. I go back to the Earthlings thing. What's it going to take for these folks to see? And I'm desperately looking for that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm putting up as many things as I can in front of them to find out the one that they're going to look at and finally say, oh, this is not working. The science isn't working. And what I'm doing to these monkeys is so horrific, so damning, that I have to stop. Not only do I have to stop, I have to now be part of the solution. Mm.
Well, and we can all do that in various ways, perhaps. So those of us, if people have money, they can donate to PETA, or some of the primate sanctuaries are probably ongoingly looking for support. What can we do if we don't have a lot of money and we just want to help spread the word?
So go to PETA.org/Seattle, sign the petitions. 250,000 people have signed.
Does that
now
help?
At least?
Does it help? I sign petitions all the time. I never really know if it helps or not.
I think it does. One of the things that we did was to actually, at that time, it was 220,000 signatures. We made a giant paper mache, literally a giant paper mache monkey. And we made him out of the signatures of these people. And we went and we left that on the doorstep of Sean Sullivan, who was actually the person at the UW who is now in charge of the Primate Center, the main grant that funds the Primate Center. You see a giant monkey outside your door with 220,000 names on it. Mm-hmm. This is a person who is already, I think, a little bit on the fence. That matters. Going to your senator, your representative, that matters. Mm-hmm. These decisions, going to UW itself, as former alumni, as community members, whether it's at UW or any of the other laboratories, University of Wisconsin, UC Davis, Yerkes, Tulane, Emory, and letting them know that, you are looking, you are paying attention, you are seeing what's being done, and it matters to you, it matters to your friends, it matters to your neighbors, and you're going to make sure that other people see as well. It is about seeing. It's about raising awareness, because, to me, I figured everyone knew. And no, people don't know.
People don't know. No, we're always distracted with other things. There's so much to distract us from. All right. And your book, you mentioned your book. Is that something that average person would be interested in reading, or is that more of a sciencey thing?
It's pretty sciencey. I thought it was kind of great. But it's called Neglected Diseases in Monkeys, from One Health to the Human-Primate Interface. And what it really looked at was, again, so monkeys, for the most part, a lot of research and field research had focused on the great apes. And this is an edited volume with about 18 chapters in it, with scientists and field researchers from around the world. And we looked at different diseases where monkeys, often macaques, play a critical role in the maintenance and the transmission of these infections. And why that's important within the context of One Health, because, going back earlier again, macaques and humans especially, they hang out together. They hang out together in Asia, they hang out together in Africa, they hang out together in Florida. And they're part of the landscape and also the pathogen landscape. And some of the things, there are some things that we do share with monkeys, like a lot of the gut bugs and gut pathogens we can share with them. So it's important to understand the role that these monkeys play in that, so that we can improve primate conservation and improve human health. So Springer Nature published this the beginning of this year with my colleague, a German scientist, and so we talk about solutions, and one of the solutions is that science needs to be a team sport. Often scientists are pretty siloed. They focus on their one question or their one species, and that doesn't move us forward rapidly enough. And so the fact that when you put together groups of scientists who have diverse skills, virologists and epidemiologists and veterinarians and anthropologists and physicians and microbiologists and data scientists, when you have these really heterogeneous groups, that's where the big ideas come from. That's where science makes huge leaps very quickly.
Right. Cool. Sounds interesting. And thank you so much for taking the time today, Lisa. I really appreciate it. And,
thank you for reaching out to me.
Yeah, well, thanks to Aaron. He met you in Seattle at a rally, he said. So.
He did.
Yeah.
And he sang a monkey song
cool.
for me. So that was very sweet.
Awesome. Awesome.
Good luck.
Thank you. Is there anything that you want to say as we go, or there's probably lots more that could be said, but just to sum it all up?
I often tell people that in the end, macaques were going to rule the world when all the other non-human primates are gone, when the chimps are gone, the gorillas, the orangutans, the leaf monkeys or whatnot. Macaques are still going to be there because they are so flexible, and that is so admirable to see in them. And I think we've got to stop punishing them for being successful.
Right.
And part of that, the grossest and harshest punishment has been our rounding them up, extracting them from the wild, dropping them in these cages, infecting them with things that in the end, all it does is kill the monkey. It's not helping the human. And we owe these animals so much more than that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.